Hey everybody, Tim here, and welcome out to Music Theory Level 2 now. This is the Unit 1 Concepts video where I'll go over basically what we're learning about for the week. So anyway, let's just get started. So here we are, we got our PowerPoint back again. So if you're taking Music Theory Level 2 and you're confused, you want to look at Music Theory Level 1. And if you're still confused looking at that, the prerequisite for that course is really like the Introduction to Piano Music. So if you don't know how to read notes yet and you don't know the basics, please go back to one of those other courses first. Because if you jump right into this one, you might be a bit confused because this already assumes you know quite a bit about music. Maybe not like a ton, but certainly the basics and some of the little more in-depth stuff. So if you haven't seen Music Theory Level 1 and you're totally confused, go back to that and watch that first. But anyway, today we're going to learn the proper names for scale degrees. Not very complicated yet. But it is important. I'll tell you why. So why do these matter? Well, music theory books and websites commonly refer to scale degrees, and I myself refer to them by their proper names instead of scale degrees. So say we have the C major scale, right? We have 8 notes in a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Instead of referring to them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or by their Roman numerals, you know, same numbers, they refer to them by their proper names. But now, before we do that, let's talk about a review of how Roman numerals are used. Because even though we have these proper names, I still, and a lot of other places, still refer to them by their scale degree numbers. But just in case I refer to them by their name, I want you to know what I'm talking about because they kind of intermix. But anyway, remember that an uppercase Roman numeral indicates that it's a major chord. So if you have an I, you know, like an uppercase I, the Roman numeral 1, then that indicates that that is a major chord built on the first note of the scale. Say you have a 2 and it's a lowercase, that indicates a minor chord. We have them all down here. One we didn't really talk about much in the last class was the diminished chord, so we'll talk about it now. It's a lowercase plus like a 0, and sometimes the 0 is like up top or like above where the I'll show you in some examples above where the lowercase Roman numeral is. And an augmented chord is an uppercase Roman numeral with a plus next to it, which you can see down here. So all these chords, so say we're in C major, so this indicates that, okay, we're playing a major chord built on the 4th note of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, Roman numeral 4. A minor chord, if it was lowercase, would indicate this, F, A flat, and C. A diminished chord, which is the lowercase plus the 0, means that you're going to play a diminished chord built on the 4th note of the scale, and then an augmented indicates that you're going to play an augmented chord built on the 4th note of the scale. If it's a 4, if it's a different number, like if it was a 2, it would be built on the 2nd note of the scale. And then obviously, if you're in a different key signature, your scale degrees will be different. So if you're in the key of G, instead of like in C major, you have you still have scale degrees like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But now they're built on G, and you have to keep in mind that in G major we have 1 sharp, F sharp, and then the minor keys have sharps and flats on their own. We'll go over that a little bit in more detail in a further lesson. But anyway, so say we're in the key of G. Well, instead of the first scale degree being C, that would make sense because we're in the key of G now. It's actually going to be G. So now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Don't forget that F sharp there. And then back to 1 or 8 as we call it. So here are the proper names. Here's what we're talking about today. So the first scale degree represented as a 1, and it's uppercase here. I'll tell you why. This is assuming we're in a major scale, by the way. If we're in a minor scale, things are a little bit different, but the names are still the same, by the way. So first scale degree represented as a 1 is commonly called the tonic. So if we're talking about so if I say to play a tonic chord and you're in the key of C, you want to play the scale built on the first scale degree. If we're in the key of F and I say to play a tonic, you want to play an F major scale because that's built on the first scale degree. If we're in the key of D, you want to play a D, especially if we're in D major, you want to play a D major if I say to build a tonic chord in that key. The second scale degree, represented as a 2, I have a minor 2 written here, again assuming you're in a minor scale, is commonly referred to as the supertonic. So far we have tonic, the first one, the scale, and they don't necessarily have to be build triads on them, but you commonly do. That's why we refer to scale degrees, especially if you're talking about like chord progressions. Common chord progression would be like 1 4 5 1. It's represented in the Roman numerals and represented as tonic, subdominant, dominant, and then tonic again. We'll get into that as we get along, so if you're confused about that, don't worry. So we're just talking about names today. So tonic, supertonic. The third scale degree is mediant, and you can build a chord on that as well. Subdominant is 4. Build a chord on it. And then you have dominant. Dominant's very important. The 5th scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is assuming we're in the key of C. And then we've got a note built on that. Submediant, which is 6. And then you have 7th scale degree really has 2. If you're in a major scale and it's the leading tone, which is a half step away from the tonic, which is the note you start on, that is going to be, by the way, that's going to be diminished most of the time if you build a triad on it. And it's called the leading tone, like I just said. But if it's a flat one, which is common in like minor scales and things like that, it's called a subtonic. So leading tone if it's, a half step away. Subtonic if it's a whole step away from the tonic. So you have tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant, leading tone, or subtonic. And then you go back to tonic. We're going to go in more detail a little bit next time. Well, anyway, let me explain it now. So if you notice, some of the scale degrees have sub in them, like subdominant and then dominant. What that commonly means is if you have a chord progression, right, and you have so say we have a 1 4 5 chord progression in the key of C, which we talked about in the last class. So we have C major, and I won't use the inversions. I'll just make this as simple as possible. You have C major, root position, and then you have F major, root position. That's called the subdominant, right? Well, it's called subdominant because it commonly leads to the dominant, which is the next chord, which happens to be the 5th chord. So that's why 1 4 5 works, is you have tonic, and then you have subdominant, which leads you to the dominant, and then back to the tonic. Same thing with mediant. Mediant's a little bit less used, that 3 chord, but you would commonly go from like minor 6, or not minor 6, but I should say submediant to your mediant. So that's why there's sub, and then there's the other one, is the one chord commonly leads into the other one of the same name. But not always. Chord progressions you can mess around with quite a bit and come up with some ones that don't really meet conventional ways, but we learn the conventions, so we learn like how to make structures in music and how to generally write a song, and then we can mess with that. You won't get as much success if you just kind of mess around with chords right away. Like, some people are real good at that, but I've always learned that once you understand the rules, you can better break those rules and come up with some new and inventive things that still sound really good. And when you learn like all this stuff, the music theory and stuff, you really understand what you're doing, so you could reproduce the results again. So, because sometimes when you mess around and you come up with something great, you don't quite understand why it's great. When you understand all the things behind it, then you understand why it's a great idea, at least most of the time. So anyway, okay, we got up to the 7th scale degree. So that's basically all we learned today. So for next time, all I want you to do is memorize these, do the assignment in the assignment folder, which has to do with these. Oh, we have a little bit after this. So just memorize the scale degrees as tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant, and then leading tone, or the subtonic if it's a flat 7, what we call a flat 7, or it's a whole step away from your tonic. Now, in a major scale, the chords built on each scale degree are, if you remember before, like when I had like represented as, they were either uppercase or lowercase, or one of them had diminished. Which one is that? That's the 7th. Where'd you go? Oh, here we go. Represented as 7, yeah, with that 0 next to it. So that's diminished. But anyway, so whenever you're on a major scale, right, and you have a key signature, so say we're in the key of G actually, right, and we only have one sharp, and that's F sharp. Remember, when you're building chords, you have to, if you're following the rules, you have to abide by the key signature until you learn other things, which we'll learn in, we'll learn what secondary dominants are later on, and that kind of doesn't break the rules, it's just different rules. But anyway, so whenever you're building, you can build a triad on any note of the scale, right? We talked about that before in the last class. So we have the tonic. We can build a chord on that. We can build a chord on this super tonic. I almost want to call it subtonic, but that's different. So tonic, supertonic, median. Remember that when you play the median now, you have to have that F sharp in there if you're in a major key. And then you have the subdominant. Remember that the dominant has to have that F sharp in there because that's in the key signature. And then you have the submediant. And then you have in your leading tone chord, remember that you need that F sharp there. And then you're back to tonic. But anyway, let's take a look at this. The tonic is commonly major in a major scale. And this is why, is because when you abide by the key signature, you have a major chord right off the bat. And we've talked about what makes a major chord before. If you don't know that, go back to Music Theory Level 1 and actually Introduction to one of the piano courses, I don't remember exactly which one now, goes into more detail. So you can go back to one of those courses and look for that, or you can send me an email and I'll help you out. But anyway, we have a major chord. If you build a chord on the not supertonic, I want to call it subtonic, supertonic. You have a minor chord just because of how the spacing is between the notes. And if you have a mediant is also minor in a major scale. And then you have subdominant. Dominant is always major in a major scale. Dominant is major as well. Remember, it's dominant. We have an F sharp here. D, F sharp A is a major chord. And then you have submediant. My brain doesn't work today, but it is submediant. It's taking me a little more time to remember these, but submediant is minor, and then you have your leading tone, which is almost always diminished in a major scale. And then if you have it's interesting, subtonic doesn't really exist in a major scale, and why is that? Well, if you have G major, right? Now you have a leading tone chord, obviously, because that has the F sharp in it, but if you have a subtonic chord in a major scale, like I said, they're more common in minor scales because it fits the key signature. It doesn't belong in this scale because it has an F natural in it, and F natural doesn't exist within the key of G major because we need that F sharp to make it G major. And then you go back to tonic, which is major again. So just go through these and try to memorize which one's major or minor. You can go through, if you know your scales and key signatures especially, it's especially easy because you can just think of where the sharp is. You go through each one. Okay, here we go. So major, that one sounds minor, that one sounds minor, can't forget the key signature. And then we have major, major, minor, and then you have diminished, and then major. You can do it that way as well. In a natural minor scale, the chords built on each scale degree are, so the equivalent of C major is A minor. We'll talk more about this later. So you have A minor, and what I mean by equivalent is they share the same key signature. So what happens is if you do that, and remember that the key of A minor is if it's the same key signature as C major, you don't have any sharps or flats. So if you do that starting on A, okay, well that's definitely a minor chord. The supertonic now, the chord built on supertonic is diminished. The mediant now is major, so that's changed from minor before. The dominant's minor, or the subdominant's minor. The dominant is minor. The submediant now is major, before it was minor. So a lot of these are flipped or changed into diminished. The leading tone, however, is still actually, you know what's interesting is in a natural minor scale there is no leading tone. There is only actually subtonic. And there's no leading tone, because if you had a leading tone in the key of A, and by the way, and all natural minor means is that it doesn't have a leading tone. There are harmonic minor scales which are the same key signature, but they have the leading tone, which means it's slightly different. But we'll go over that next time. So a subtonic in A minor is G major. So it's actually the subtonic now is, it was major before actually, so that one stays the same. Although subtonic, like we talked about, doesn't exist in a major scale. And why is that? That's because by definition, if you have a subtonic chord, it has a note that's not in the original key signature, so therefore it doesn't exist within that key. So anyway, that wraps it up for today. So, give me any questions you may have, tim@lessonsontheweb.com, or use the form on the website to submit any feedback or any questions you may have, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. So this was Unit 1 of Music Theory Level 2. Again, thanks for signing up, and I'll see you in the classroom. Thanks.